Now this is a time for a special session, that is a presentation on building a continuous learning culture in an organization. Can I please request to join me on stage? Everyone please welcome Mr. Abhijit Bhaduri, Chief Learning Officer, Wipro. Can I please have the gentleman on stage with us? All right, let's begin this special session now.
Slides. I need the slides on.
Do you have a pen, right?
No, it's already here. Good afternoon. I'm going to, while he's setting up the slides, I just want to put a little context in terms of what I want to talk about, which is really how do you build a culture of continuous learning. So I want to talk about 3 or 4 pieces in which we need to look at this entire piece. The first is, if you look at what has changed in the business scenario in the last couple of years, the first thing is that business is beginning to look more and more like a flash mob. So which means that it is going to appear suddenly, it's going to appear when it's least expected, and the window of opportunity in which this is going to work is going to be extremely brief. So the first part that is going to actually change is when you have business which is going to work with a very short window of opportunity, you will have skills which will become pretty much like firecrackers. It's going to become a single use. So the skills that people are going to come into the workplace, they are going to have limited time and opportunity to use this, which basically means that the earlier model which we have used historically, which is to say that do you make or buy talent, do you build or buy talent, that no longer is a choice, because no matter who you hire, eventually you will have to land up, if you want to get real value for money for that particular person's skill, you will have to invest in developing that person. Here is the crux of the challenge, that our education system actually has always focused on tenure, which means no matter who you look at, everybody would have done their degree in the same point of time, whether it's 4 years or 5 years, depending on what you are speaking for. So you have 4 years to do the degree. However, the proficiency level with which various people could come into the workforce will vary a lot. So the proficiency could be more for somebody, could be less for someone. Now if you look at what does the employer really need, the employer really doesn't care whether you did your degree in 4 years or 4.5 years or 5 years. As long as you are able to provide a kind of a defined quality. In the past, that quality assurance was done by either the institute where you did your degree from or the degree in itself, which fundamentally means that if you went in for one of the premier institutes, it was a proxy for quality. Now, if you sort of look at where that whole model has come in today, and to some extent in the morning, Shashi Tharoor referred to it, and saying that, you know, if you look at that skew is phenomenal. You have a few, colleges, which every year will have a certain quality of output. Even within that, there is actually a great variance. So people here who are employers who have hired from various reputed colleges, but who have got actually to the lower half of the class will tell you that that degree is not great. Therefore, you are landing up with a scenario where business is changing, skills are changing. You also have a lot of, so we recently did a survey of, different people in the workforce, and we are pretty much, for us, 2 out of 3 people are in their 20s. So that's the workforce that we are dealing with at Wipro. And what you have is a scenario where, when we surveyed those people, people actually talk about the fact that learning and development is one of the key reasons why they want to get into work with a certain employer. Also at the same time, you have the fact that the window of opportunity for such a person to build a career is actually very limited. So people, whether you look at it from the employer's point of view or the employer's point of view, it's really going to be about creating an immersive experience which both benefit from. for whatever duration people are going to work with them for. So it is in this context, if you want to talk about how do you create a culture which values continuous learning. All right. And I'm going to ask you this whole question that if you think about in your mind, what has been the last very intense learning experience that you had? And there would be three factors that make a learning experience extremely intense. The first of that is, of course, internal motivation. If you are internally driven to learn whatever you want to learn, you will find a way to do it well. And actually today, if you see the difference between skills, when you use them in a high growth environment like it used to be, and when you look at skills in a low growth environment or a slow growth environment, whichever way you define it, it's going to be a little different. So high growth environment actually demands more generalist skills, so because things are happening rapidly, now when you have a low growth environment, is actually depth which matters. So those little windows of opportunity that I referred to in business are going to go for people with deep degrees of proficiency. So proficiency rather than the degree is going to become important. And really people are not going to care where you got your degree from as long as you can do it well. I mean, think about it. You go to a doctor and any skill or any profession which is primarily driven by skill has always followed this model. When you go to the doctor, you want a person who can cure you. You don't really care whether the person has 10 years of experience or 12 years of experience. You don't really care whether the person graduated from college A versus college B. But the person's ability to really deliver on the promise is really what you're going for. You think about what happens when you are looking at actors. You really don't care whether the person went to acting school or not. The market actually decides on a completely different place. So the point I'm making is, the moment you move into a skill-driven system, which we are moving into more and more, it is really going to be about proficiency. It's not going to be about degrees. So which actually talks about the fact that are people really motivated to learn on their own? The second factor which drives an intense learning experience comes from the fact that you want a coach who can work with you, a coach who is tough but who cares. Both are important. Now we have seen this, lots of times in movies, really, which says that the tough guy comes in, he beats everybody into shape and then sort of gives them a hug at the end. Actually, the model is the other way around. I mean, a lot of research, especially if you look at Amy Cuddy's research, warmth competence matrix, actually talks about what do people really, people who succeed, are first able to connect at a human level and then display competence. Okay, so this whole model that is really backwards when it is shown in movies, and it sort of creates a lot of that model that I'm going to be a real nasty guy, but who is really going to help you grow. It doesn't really work like that. So you want a coach who is actually first caring and then who's competent. The reason why a lot of mentorship programs do not go well in organizations when you scale them up is because we automatically assume that anybody who's senior is a good mentor. That's wrong. It's really as ridiculous as expecting anybody who's more senior is a better singer than the one who's more junior. You don't think of it like that. Either skill, seniority has nothing to do with the skill. You could be senior and not have that skill. You could be junior and you could have that skill. We've seen other people talk about that. So first criteria, internal motivation. Second criteria, tough but caring coach, which brings us to the third and most important piece. And perhaps of all the things that you look at, the one thing that really makes a difference is the culture which gives you the freedom to fail. Because when there are things which are to be built on a continuous basis, now whether you talk about building a culture of innovation or design thinking or whatever is it that you are talking about, the model for success is really going to be you have to have people who can pick up the skill on their own a little by little. Really think about the time when you learn to cycle on your own. You sort of, wobble a little, you fall down, you pick yourself up and go back. That's going to be really the model of skill building. So an organization's success or failure really is going to be determined by these three factors. How do you create, how do you get people who have the internal motivation? To me, that's a selection issue. When you hire, you don't just hire people who are going to be able to do this job, because it doesn't matter what you hire the person for, the job is going to change. So if I look at in our own organization, 2 years back, the delivery heads, had to start looking at selling. Now, when they came into their job, they did not really expect that job description never mentioned selling as a requirement. However, that becomes a requirement as the nature of the business goes. So whether you want it or not, the nature of the business as it is going to shift is going to demand that you will have to learn skills which you did not come in when you signed up for the job. And that is going to be a necessary part of the way the jobs are going to evolve. So which brings us actually to this whole thing that until people have the freedom to try out the jobs, wobble a little bit, fail, and pick themselves up, and if this is not going to be part of the organization's culture, it's going to be hard for people to reskill themselves, which is the central thesis I want to talk to you today about. So if you went away forgetting everything else that I said, just remember that it's not going to be about just hiring people. It is really going to be about really figuring it out. How do you build a culture of continuous learning and continuously reskilling yourself? The onus is going to shift from being the problem of the employer to the problem of the individual. The reason, again, as I said, is when in the earlier times, when jobs remained static, imagine the job is really, think about a sort of job which is static, it has remained like this, it has not changed. You came in with a certain degree of inputs from the educational degree that you did, and the gap was actually met by the employer. The employer invested in training and sort of. Now, if this today is going to be losing count on both the issues, educational institutes really take 3 to 4 years before they create a curriculum, they find teachers, they train people, they have an evaluation system, and they give out a degree. By the time they are doing that, it's probably obsolete any which way, or at least it's really become so mainstream that you don't really have a competitive edge. So really, the skills which will give your career a longer runway, and for an organization to actually succeed, you don't need skills which can be taught, because by which time it's already mainstream. You actually need the skills which are so new that it is actually still not, we've not figured out how to teach them. So you are looking for people who will be able to pick up those skills on their own. So reskilling yourself is going to become really big. So here are 3 ways in which you can implement this idea. So here are 3 simple things to look for in the organization. The first is, the importance of learning is really through role models. If in your organization the senior leaders do not demonstrate that they need to reskill themselves, it doesn't matter what your R&D department does or HR function does or whoever else does. Because people really need to look at role models for learning. Families which, and there are studies which actually talk about this, when you look at eating habits and obesity, there are studies which actually talk about the fact that families where, the parents are good role models for eating habits, obesity is not an issue. Families where parents are good learners or they read and stuff like that, it's built in their curriculum, the kids learn to read by themselves. So their vocabulary level is higher, their cognitive abilities are higher, etc., etc. So the importance of having role models who will be able to tell you that it's important for them to learn, and therefore they become role models, for the others, they inspire the others. The second element that you look for in the organization is to look at your reward and recognition systems. What exactly do you reward? Yeah, I know everybody says that we reward all the people who do a good job. Well, that's really not the point. If doing a good job is not going to give you a competitive edge, if your competitive edge is going to come from people who are able to continuously learn and reskill themselves on their own, then the reward system actually needs to be such that it's rewarding people who are learning on their own and who are able to, put this stuff into practice. So really to look at how often do you celebrate people who are learning by themselves? What kind of policies do you have? Let me give you a quick example, and I'm going to link it to the third point which I'm going to talk about, which is this whole thing of reskilling. So, rewards, reskilling, role models, the 3 R's, if I had to really create a mnemonic. I hadn't thought of it like that. But encourage continuous reskilling. That's a screenshot of Coursera. Think about the fact that today, on the internet, anybody who has a smartphone, who has an internet connection, is able to come and learn on their own whatever skills that you are looking for. So, you have today the access to the best of teachers who are teaching the stuff which you may or may not have had access to, and who are teaching the latest version, and who are teaching it, through these massive open online courses. Coursera.org, for example, you sort of look at the range of courses that are being offered, the data scientist toolbox, functional programming principles in Scala, algorithm design and analysis, jazz improvisation. Look at the amount of things. So one of the things that I want to talk about is what we've been actually doing in our setup is to encourage people to take these Coursera, courses on their own. Now, it is certainly going to be a different way of learning. So you will have scenarios where people will sign up, and they don't complete this. So actually this Coursera, they actually enroll thousands of people, 20,000, 30,000 people. There's only a 3% to 4%, 11% is the maximum rate of completion. Why is that so? It's because we have always had learning as a very passive model. You sit there, somebody explains that stuff to you, and you learn. This model is really about learning on your own. So there is a social element to learning that you have to create. So therefore, 3 models in which you have to encourage people is really going to have, simple thing to do is to get a bunch of your people, to sign up for the same course, and let those 15, 20 people coach and work with each other, motivate each other to actually complete the course. Because without doing that, you will not be able to craft, this whole environment in which you will be able to learn continuously. If you think that the employer is going to be able to do all of that, you're mistaken. You will never have that many funds. Because the physical process of learning in a classroom like this, think about the fact that if this is being held in Delhi, it simply means that somebody from Bombay either has to travel down or is not able to use it or is not able to participate in this. How do you craft methods by which you are able to get people to learn on their own? Because that's going to be the only method of survival. So, if you summarize this entire thing, you are really looking at 3 or 4 very important pieces. So I said business is going to have very short windows of opportunity. It's going to be like a flash mob. Skills are going to be really like firecrackers. It's going to be like a single use. And once you've done that, your career will get extended only if people are able to learn on their own. Therefore, it's not going to be about mainstream skills. It's really going to be about people picking up niche skills on their own. If you're looking at those niche skills, you will not have formal methods of learning. In either case, an organization is not going to find it financially feasible to send everyone to a training program where they can go there, sit there, and learn on their own. It is going to be an area where you will value and create people you need to celebrate people who are able to reskill themselves. So a simple thing that if somebody has done a certificate in Coursera which is relevant to you, recognize that. To begin with, recognize anyone who's able to do this anyway. Even if it is not, it doesn't matter. They could have done a course in jazz improvisation, and you will say, what does jazz improvisation have to do with my business? It's not really about the subject. What you want to recognize is that the person has taken the ability and has picked up the ability to learn on their own using a method which is probably going to be the most effective to keep you current. So what you are really trying to celebrate, so the organizations need to look at changing the policies that we have towards the way we reward people when they learn. It cannot be that you will have models which say so many people days of training or how many days of training. I mean, that's a completely 50s model. Abandon that. It is also not going to be about classroom training anymore. Abandon that. Well, okay, supplement that, don't abandon it. But I think the real crux of this whole model is how do you encourage people to learn through social media, on Twitter. I probably read far more today because of the access Twitter gives me to the biggest thinkers in the world, what they are doing, what the magazines that I can't subscribe to, I can really do a kind of, I got into a tweet chat this early morning at 6 o'clock. Some of the finer thinkers are running a tweet chat at 6 o'clock in the morning, my time. So I joined that. And the number of ideas that we've shared is probably something that has taught me a lot more than what I could have learned probably from a formal class. So I think the way that we look at, if I were to ask you, how many of you think of, when you think of the word learning, how many of you really think of the traditional classroom or chalk and board in your mind visually, as compared to, the number of people who would view the mobile phone as a symbol of learning. And that is the shift mentally that we need to make. So thank you very much. Happy to take any questions. This presentation is there on Twitter. I've just put this on Twitter a little while back, and I'll put it on SlideShare as well. Yes, sir.
So now, corporate has learned a lot from the armed forces, and they picked up a lot of management techniques. But I personally feel that one thing which we in the corporate didn't pick up was the training and the skill upgrade which the forces insist. Today, I make a mistake in corporate, we lose some money. I make a mistake in the army, I lose lives. Therefore, they have gone in for a very, very systematic sort of techniques for learning. Every 6 to 8 months, sure, I am required to undergo a skill upgrade.
But that's where I disagree. That 6 to 8 months is too long a period.
True, sir. So reduce the time. I'm just trying to...
No, even if you reduce it to what? What will you reduce it to? 1 month? I am really saying that I agree with the principle that you need to, upgrade your skill the way armed forces have done. I'm simply saying today you don't have the luxury to wait for the armed forces model of going into a classroom and getting nominated to a course. I'm saying you have to learn on your own, skill building, so, leveraging social media and the net.
It is not always the course and this thing. A person is required to undergo a course where he relearns a lot of things after 3 to 4 years. It's every 3 to 4 years of graduation. That is the model which they are following. You go through a skill upgrade within your subunits and your units, which happens every 3 months, 6 months, depending on the requirement and the skill deficiencies which you identify in the people you command. So therefore, there's a very systematic model which is there. But what I'm trying to say is, if the principle is very clear, 80% of the people do not want to go in to learn. I am in a comfort zone. Why should I learn further?
I'm just simply saying that that luxury is going to not be there. You can't decide whether I want to learn or not because your job will going to get eliminated. So if you sort of look at jobs, most jobs, the lower is going to get automated and eliminated. Therefore, it's only going to be, you have to move up the value chain, and that will not happen if you depend on anybody else for 3 months or 6 months or a year's time to learn. You have to do it on your own on a daily basis. So that's basically a little shift that I'm talking about.
Right.
But point taken. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Just to add on his point that he's saying people are in their comfort zones. We have recently introduced LMS, Learning Management System, into our organization. And there are only few percentage of employees who go through that portal. How to encourage, how to engage more employees to, go to the LMS?
One is, simply your LMS, chances are that, I really don't know which organization, and chances are that people can't access your LMS from home. Yeah, so that's the whole point, that, learning cannot remain within office hours. It cannot remain within the office. It has to be made accessible whenever, wherever, whoever. So whoever I can learn from, whether inside the organization or outside, whenever, whether during work hours or weekends, and wherever, whether I'm in a bus, whether I'm in the airport, I should be able to learn. So the only way that organizations will be able to do that is if you supplement this whole process by encouraging people also to, learn from outside. So therefore, the MOOCs which you can do on a 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you are able to pick up a skill because it's really done in a very structured way. So the point I'm suggesting is supplement it with the resources which are freely available on the net and build the ability and the habit of people to learn on their own. Don't wait for a trigger. Don't wait for the employee to get nominated to a class before they can learn about it. So that's the only shift I'm saying. Yes, sir.
I'm running a school, senior secondary school in Delhi. I wanted to ask how to encourage stability in the organization. Like there are so many teachers are there. So as soon as they get a good opportunity, say 1,000 above in the salary, 1,000 to 1,000 above in the salary, they shift on to another school. And sometimes they don't give notice period also. They just shift because in the other school they are supposed to join from the next day only. So how to encourage this stability factor? Today even teachers are also very ambitious, very ambitious, over ambitious rather.
But why should teachers not be ambitious? I mean,
actually teachers are known to be people of principles. So
I think that's a myth. I mean, I think it's a 3,000-year-old model which just needs to be questioned.
Yeah.
Any profession which gets the best minds has to pay the best minds, because otherwise they will not get in. Part of our challenge is that we don't have great people who are inspiring others in the school system. If you think about, the schools, I'm going to try and give a brief response to a fairly complex question. I think in the school system, ask yourself basic things. What is the world going to look like 20 years from now? Because chances are that the world that you're preparing the kids for is going to, they will start using it for, the next couple of years by the time they finish school and all that. 20 years from now, what kind of a world is it going to be? What skills are going to be relevant? Third, in order to teach that, what method and technology should be made available? And fourth, how do we create these peak learning experiences using this? If you don't get people who are qualified to teach, today lots of schools and colleges, I'm sure your school is an exception to this whole process, but lots of schools and colleges really don't have a choice to get in people who are skilled in instructional design. A very simple method. Learning and development specialists in organizations are not necessarily people who are skilled in instructional design and media content, because we've never really had to demand that skill. But because these things are there, if you make learning and development, and this may be a really very idealistic response, but I do believe that, if you make learning and development and skill development as the single reason where people are going to be able to stay on, that probably is a lasting value proposition. I'll give you a small example of where we tried it, why I'm sort of putting my money behind this model. When I was in advertising, I used to look after HR in an advertising setup. It had the same problem. People quit. It's a very small pool of people, and they quit. So we sort of said that what is it that most people are really scared of in their career, and people are really scared of being obsolete. Now, I'm talking about this example, which is a fairly dated example, but even today that is valid because we've just done a survey which proves this whole thing. So if people are interested in staying current, and if the employer is able to provide that, that is the single largest reason why people stay. Because the moment they feel, I have learned whatever I have to learn, the employer is not going to invest in me, I might as well cash in on my thing, which is where they will cash in for that extra $1,000. But if you say that I'm going to continue to build my capital, and then I'm going to learn, so make that the single largest reason for people to stay. It is not going to be about trading those skills. As soon as you make that process and you invest in it for a span of time, you'll see results. That's my limited idealistic response, perhaps. Somebody else? I think somebody had.
All right, so with this, we will take questions offline.
Yes, so that's a hint for me to keep quiet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abhijit Bhaduri. I request you to please be on stage with us. And with this, I request once again Mr. Rajesh Khubchandani from ETH to hand over the bunch of bouquet. Everyone, please thank the gentleman on stage with us.